Welcome to the S.O.A.P Bible Study Series from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. We're starting a brand new study series, reading plan, whatever you want to call it.
Yep. I thought you were going to say a new book. I was going to go two books.
Actually, we're actually going to do 5 books in this. Over the course of 4 weeks, we're going to be working through some of the minor prophets. Now, minor doesn't mean they're not worth reading.
Right, exactly.
Minor is usually based on, because of the size compared to what's called the major prophets. Right. Major prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah, Ezekiel, they're 40, 50, 60 chapters, right? Yeah. These guys, 7, yep. We might show up,
Yeah. So what are we doing first?
Yeah, so we're going to do the books of Micah and Nahum, and then Habakkuk, Zephaniah, and Malachi. So not like all right in a row, but those 4, they sort of jump around a little bit, but we'll do those over the next 4 sessions together.
Nice. All right. So let's start with Micah.
Let's do Micah.
Right? New book. So what's Micah is, his name means who is like Yah.
Yah. Mm-hmm.
Who is Yah?
No, who is like Yah. Yeah. So Yah is Y-A-H. It's a short version of Jehovah.
Yeah.
So Jehovah, Yahweh, Jehovah, whatever. And it shows up, it's sort of a poetic. It shows up in the Psalms as sort of this short version. But it's like a nickname almost, right?
So in other words, who is like God?
Yeah.
Right. Which is a major theme of his book, too, which is kind of cool. So Micah was actually a prophet during the split kingdom time. And I think it's really important to understand that, too. So if you think back to the first 3 kings with Saul and David and Solomon, it's like, okay. And then what happened after Solomon is Solomon's son became king. And you would think he would have had some of the smarts that Solomon got, but
they missed the generation.
He wasn't part of it. And he didn't have a good support group, too, which would have been his friends, which might have been another problem, that he had his friends as his advisors.
Yeah.
And he made a couple bad decisions, and there actually, not that there was a war, but there was a civil war that happened, and the North split from the South. And the North called themselves Israel, and the South called themselves Judah, mainly because that was the main tribe. There was also, Benjamin and Simeon there, too.
Yeah, but mostly the tribe of Judah, right?
Yeah,
and Israel was everybody else.
Right. So then there was a king for both these kingdoms, and we had a mess, is what we had. But we are in the middle of this time. For this going on here. Actually, we're towards the end of the time that's going on here.
Yeah, he mentions 3 of the kings of Judah, not the last ones exactly, but pretty close
getting
toward
down there.
The end, right? Yeah, definitely at the end of Israel's, toward the end of Israel's existence, I guess, because Israel was ended before Judah was, right?
So I'm sure I'm going to screw this up, and I'm going to have a question at some point. But the northern kingdom was called Israel, and the southern kingdom is called Judah. Mm-hmm. So in this book, when we see Israel, they're referring to the northern kingdom. Specifically
because he's going to refer to Samaria and Jerusalem as the respective capitals. Okay. Samaria being the capital of Israel, the northern kingdom, Jerusalem, the southern kingdom. Sometimes he will refer to the whole thing, and so we just have to.
Well, there's a third name that he uses in there too.
Yeah,
and we'll hit it in a minute here.
Right.
Okay. All right. So the deal here is this was prophesied long ago. God knew this was going to happen. He also knew how it was going to end up. And it doesn't end up good for either Israel or Judah. And it ends up with the northern kingdom being attacked and taken over by a country at that time called Assyria. Mm-hmm. And the southern kingdom, I think, was also attacked by Assyria. But then Babylon came in a couple times and wiped them out.
Yeah.
All right, so Micah was a prophet in the southern kingdom, which was Judah, which makes a lot of sense because Judah was still following the line of David. They were still, not that they were, together with God, but they were way more together than the northern kingdom.
Well, and if you remember from one of our previous series in the Kings, right, where we've done this before, the 20 kings that Israel had and the 20 kings that Judah had, the only good kings
came
came
out
from
of
Judah, right?
right.
All the rest of them were, all of them in Israel and most of them in Judah were bad. So, but the prophets, most of the prophets seem to come from Judah, even though they worked in both kingdoms, right?
Right. And we see that Micah served during the, like you said, the reign of 3 kings, and we know he's from Judah, and we know it because he says it in chapter 1, verse 1. Yeah. So it's a nice kind of starting point there. And in the first chapter, we kind of learn the entire message of the split kingdoms, and God's mad at the entire nation of Israel, and he's going to enact his judgment on them. And he says this is all because of Jacob's rebellion, and that's that third name in there.
Yeah.
And we got to go all the way back to Genesis chapter 32, where God renames a guy by the name of Jacob to Israel.
Yeah.
Right. So Jacob is another word for Israel, and they would be talking about the whole nation at that point.
So now, that's at least in the net translation that I have here, verse 5. All this is because of Jacob's rebellion and the sins of the nation of Israel. So the key is the nation, not the kingdom of Israel.
Okay.
Right. So we're looking at all of them because Israel is the nation, no matter how they get split. God.
Right. Exactly. God.
Right,
well, first God didn't want kings. God didn't want them to split. God didn't want any of this.
Right.
And he's
so he'll refer to the two sides, but he's also referring to the whole. You're still one nation. You're still my people.
Yeah. We'll see where the nation of Israel had pagan temples, rampant idolatry. These were the sins that's happening, and it's obvious in this first chapter. God's not taking sides. God's blaming both sides for what's going on here in both nations, and we'll see both nations in shambles.
We'll use the term kingdoms, both kingdoms as one nation, multiple kingdoms, right? Yeah. Just for clarity.
God also lists a number of cities. In the nation and what's going to happen to them. And then we end chapter 1 saying a number of people are going to be taken into exile.
Yeah. Yep.
So number 2, God goes into the people and their bad sins, right? And what we find out is that there are wicked schemers, powerful people that steal because they can.
Yeah.
And God says a disaster's coming. And he says, there's going to be songs about you that they're just going to taunt you with these songs because they can, but at the end all your land is going to be taken away. And people say God's patience is limitless, but the people are the enemy is the people, and they are stealers and wrongly evict widows, and we see that in the Old and New Testament, defraud children. And those people are going to be forced to leave.
It's interesting because verse 7, do they say the Lord's patience can't be exhausted? He would never do such a thing. And I think that's a really important point because people use that today. Right. Well, God is long-suffering, God is patient, he's never going to judge. Well, we can't pit one of God's attributes against another of his attributes. Yes, he is patient and long-suffering, but he is also just and holy and righteous.
Right. And how do those two fit together?
Yeah,
they don't.
He is long-suffering, he is patient, but it doesn't last forever.
Right.
Punishment, justice will come.
Right.
And they see that here.
Well, and that's going to happen. And then the nice thing at the end of this chapter is God then says, I will restore my people.
That's big in across the prophets in the Old Testament, is that no matter how much destruction and punishment and stuff is prophesied, they almost always come back. Not every time, but most of the time they come back with but God is faithful and he has promises that are still unfulfilled and he will fulfill these promises. We've talked about the king, Davidic king and the millennium and the kingdom and all that stuff. He has to regather the people. He has to regroup them because
he's not done yet.
He's not done yet. Yeah.
He's not done with his promises.
Yeah. So this back and forth of judgment and blessing or wrath and restoration, we see that a lot. And as we go through the minor prophets, we'll see this over and over.
Chapter 3 starts with Micah, who's writing this, saying, I said.
Yeah.
So this seems to be Micah talking instead of God, which is good. But the question is, okay, so this is Micah talking. Do we listen to him less?
No. We'll go back and forth between Micah and God, but Micah is a prophet. He is speaking with God's authority. And so even though it's not like a direct, thus saith the Lord type thing,
He's still on point.
He's still on point. You get down to verse 8. I'm full of courage that the Lord's Spirit gives, and I have a strong commitment to justice, and this enables me to confront Jacob with their rebellion. So he is speaking with God's authority, and which one of the great things of inspiration is that it doesn't have to be directly dictated. It's still God's message that's given to them.
Yeah. Okay, so if chapter 2 is about the people are bad, chapter 3 is more about the leadership is terrible. And it's all about the bad leadership. And the level of hurt that the leadership has inflicted on the people, it's going to come back to them at time of judgment.
Yeah.
And it fits right in with what you were talking about. And God says, I'm just going to ignore you.
Yeah, and we see that in other prophets as well, where he doesn't accuse just the people of their sin. He does bring it back on the leadership. Yeah. And because unlike every other nation in the world, Israel is primarily supposed to be a spiritual nation. They're supposed to be showing God to the world. And so their leaders are not just presidents and prime ministers. Their leaders are the religious leaders.
Right.
And if the religious leaders are doing things wrong,
right, then
they have an extra special attention from God, shall we say. In Ezekiel, they're called false shepherds.
Yeah.
Right. You're supposed to be shepherding my people, but you're doing it wrong and you're hurting them instead. Right. And so we see the same thing here in Micah.
Right. Then God talks about the prophets who mislead people too, that they're going to receive no visions or there are no omens, and the prophets will be ashamed. And then Micah comes in and says, he is full of courage in the Lord's Spirit, trying to, I think, show that he's not one of these false prophets.
Right,
there.
Exactly.
Yeah. And he says the leaders that, from his point, the leaders that he knows of haste justice and pervert what's right. And these are kings that he's talking to and talking about, that he is writing down, that the kings are then reading. Yeah. So this is strong.
Well, back in chapter 1, one of the kings that he prophesied during the reign of was Ahaz, which was one of the worst kings of Judah. So you can see how it fits in with, literally what was going on in Jerusalem at the time.
Yeah. Micah ends chapter 3, these people, everybody claims that they're following God, but they're not. And because of them, Israel's going to be plowed up like a field, again, the nation. Chapter 4 starts with in future days. So we need to figure out what does that mean? Is that past from us, but future from Micah, or is it future from us? And it says this is when Jesus is going to be ruling the world from Jerusalem. So that's a really big indication.
Yeah. Of course, it doesn't say the word Jesus.
Yeah,
but all of the Messiah. And,
that's me putting it in.
Yeah, well, the Lord's Temple Mount will be the most important of all, and people are going to stream to it from all the nations. That is not happening right now.
No, nor has it happened.
and it hasn't happened in history yet, right?
Yeah, so what's that future going to look like? Like you said, Jerusalem's going to be the most important mountain in the world. People and nations are going to come to the temple to learn how to live and learn God's laws.
Yeah.
Which, that's an awesome thing.
Yeah.
God, Jesus will arbitrate disputes between nations, and there's going to be peace. There's a famous verse in there where the swords are going to be beaten into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks.
Yep. No more war. People will be able to sit, in verse 4, sit under your own grapevine. It's like, what does that have to do with anything? Because it's peaceful.
Right.
Think of Israel.
Yeah, the work is done.
Yeah, think of Israel today.
I don't have to guard it. I don't have to.
In history is just, they haven't been able to sit there in peace, on their front porch and, type thing. And he says this will actually happen in the future one day.
Yeah, then he returns to the present time, and that would be Micah's time, where Jerusalem is referred to as a daughter of Zion. And it says, you've lost your king. And are they talking about the human king, or are they talking about God turning his back on Israel?
Well, I don't think so. It's so much that they've lost the king as he's sort of taunting them in verse 9. Jerusalem, why are you shouting so loudly? Do you have no king? Has your king disappeared? Why are you so upset? What's wrong? And I think it wasn't so much as like he's gone as you
He's
think
evil, he's terrible, he's...
well, you think
Yeah.
you think you're fine. This is the king you wanted. Everything's good. So why are you being so depressed or whatever?
Yeah. Then he talks again about the daughter of Zion, who's in labor, right? So something is going to happen here, and there's going to be a struggle. The city's going to be lost, and that the people are going to be going exiled to Babylon.
Yeah.
And again, they will be rescued.
Yeah.
And then at the end, just before the Messiah returns, the nation will be, or all the nations will be planning on desecrating Jerusalem, and the Messiah will return.
Yep.
Yeah. So kind of cool. Talking about a near-term prophecy of we're going to be exiled, and then a long-term prophecy.
Yeah,
too.
and you see that a lot really in chapter 5, because chapter 5 starts with a really famous verse.
Yeah.
Chapter 5, verse 2 about Bethlehem, that
Yep.
seemingly insignificant among the clans of Judah, from you a king will emerge who will rule Israel on my behalf, whose origins are in the distant past. Of course, we read that at Christmas a lot.
Yep.
Because Jesus was born in Bethlehem.
Yeah. So does your version have Bethlehem and then another?
Ephratah, Ephratah.
Which is what?
Sort of like the, some people look at it as a region, some people look at it as a descriptor, like a descriptive term.
Right.
Bethlehem is the actual name of the village, though.
Right. And in my mind, I can remember looking at a map of Israel, and there were actually 2 Bethlehems on
Yes.
there. Which was very confusing because I just saw one at first, and it was the wrong one, which is way in the north,
Yes.
instead of the one that's right outside of Jerusalem.
Which is really important, why the Bethlehem where Messiah was coming from is the Bethlehem of Judah,
Right.
not the Bethlehem of Galilee.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. So we see over and over again in these first 5 chapters, because of sin and idol worshiping and sinful leaders, that Israel is going to be given over to the world. The nation's going to be in exile, but then there will be a return, and it will become the most important nation.
Yeah.
So we have really everything in there that is just kind of repeated over and over.
Yeah.
And then chapter 5's over. I love, don't love any of this, right? Because it shouldn't even happen. But at the end of chapter 5, it says, "Though I have fallen, I will get back up." Mm-hmm. Right? So throughout this all, there's this judgment that's going to be happening, but it's always followed by, "But you will be restored." There is hope. There is something that's coming up next. And I always think that's cool.
Yeah.
When that happens.
Yeah, that's that wrath and restoration. It's the judgment and the blessing. The term that we use is the day of the Lord. And there are many days of the Lord that have happened in the past. There is one big day of the Lord still yet to come. We sometimes call that the tribulation, followed by the millennium. And that's when all of this stuff, some of this has happened already, but all of it finally will be fulfilled. Like, Jerusalem is the most important in the millennium, when Jesus is here to reign forever.
Right.
So,
yeah, good place to end.
Yeah. So if it's been a while since you've read through the Minor Prophets, hopefully you'll enjoy these next few weeks and brush back up on some of these things. But hopefully you'll see that it's not just the wrath, but there's this constant encouragement where God is faithful. He will fulfill his promises, even if it seems like it takes a long time. And I hope that's encouraging for you as well as you go through the things that you do. Share this with your friends and family if you would. Subscribe and ask them to do the same thing. And we will pick up here and see the rest of Micah and get into Nahum next time.
Bye, everybody.